have 3 healthy boundaries for you to set to keep yourself out of trouble with the opposite sex. Stay tuned as we unpack those. Years ago, as a young 20-something, I heard a sermon that has always stuck with me and really became kind of some foundational counseling tips that I have provided to clients over the years. The sermon was titled Talk, Time, and Trust. And the arc of the sermon was these are the 3 things you want to avoid in order to affair-proof your marriage or your relationship. Now, I was a young 20-something. I didn't think it was particularly useful to me at the time, but nonetheless, I have found it incredibly helpful, both personally and professionally. So the concept is this: if you don't want to get involved with a person of the opposite sex, if you want to be able to protect yourself that way, keep yourself pure or committed only to your spouse or to the person with whom you're in a relationship, there are 3 things to avoid: talk, time, and trust with that person. And in general, probably with the overall opposite sex is probably a good rule of thumb. But let me unpack this. Why talk, time, and trust? When we have a conversation with somebody, it elicits oxytocin. Now, oxytocin, it's called the cuddle hormone. It's called the bonding hormone because it's fundamental in bonding relationships, particularly between mothers and infants. But it also is the hormone involved in trust. It brings about in us an ability to trust the other person. And if you're talking to somebody, just even at the water cooler, let's say you have a very difficult meeting and you walk out and you're at the water cooler and somebody meets you there and says, "Oh, you look a little frazzled. How you doing?" And you share a minute just kind of venting, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, that sounds a little rough." You get some oxytocin from it, which causes you to trust this person you're sharing with more in the future, and they get some oxytocin out of it also because you've confided in them and they're going to trust you. Well, if you're talking a lot with a member of the opposite sex, it's going to create this oxytocin, and you're going to trust them even if they're not necessarily worthy of the trust. And you might trust them in ways that trust has begun to deteriorate in your marriage or in your primary relationship in ways that you really need to go back and repair. So that's the first thing. Don't spend a lot of time talking to members of the opposite sex, especially about personal matters. That's really where we get that oxytocin boost. The next thing in our talk, time, and trust is time. When we spend time with a member of the opposite sex, we develop that oxytocin. But if we start to become attracted to them, what happens is our amygdala, that's our emotion center of the brain, becomes more active. Actually, the entire limbic system does, the amygdala and other structures in the limbic system. But our prefrontal cortex, where we make good decisions, actually downregulates. And so now we're not making as good of decisions. And the oxytocin combined with this downregulation in the prefrontal cortex means that it's going to make red flags harder to spot. And we are also going to take risks that we normally would not take if we were in our quote unquote right mind. So that's why we don't want to spend a lot of time with a member of the opposite sex that we don't really need to. Finally, trust. When you start to put your trust in a member of the opposite sex, not only are you going to continue that oxytocin bond, but women are especially vulnerable here because we not only produce more oxytocin, but testosterone blocks oxytocin. So a woman can end up trusting a member of the opposite sex way too early, and that could be exploited against her. But also, it gives the brain, the neurobiology gives us a false sense of having fallen for this person. Or you might actually end up falling for the person. And it's a lot more work to extricate yourself from that situation than it is to prevent yourself from getting in it in the first place. I hope these 3 tips for these 3 boundaries for safeguarding your relationship have been helpful. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you.